A Terrible Vengeance, Chapter 5. Kiss Me. The first glance in his master's face filled Davis with a vague alarm. Gage's talk had produced an effect quite out of proportion to its merit, and a cold terror struck to the valet's heart as he thought there might, spite of his lofty skepticism, be something after all in the mouse and the bird and the drummer boy, in the black dog, in the phantom carriages, in the spirits it required, the united exertions of 12 clergymen, with the bishop in long sleeves among them. To lay, in Highland's second sight and Irish fancies, and in little feet paddling around and about a man's bed, and following wherever he went. What awful disaster could those footprints portend? Would the train be smashed up? Did a river lie before them? And if so, was the sign to die? All these thoughts and many more passed through David's mind as he stood looking at his master's pallid face and waiting for him to speak. "I wish you to come in here," said Mr. Murray after a pause and with a manifest effort. "I'm not quite well." "Can I get you anything, sir?" asked the valet. "Will you not wait and go by another train?" "No, I shall be better presently. Only, I do not like being alone." Davis opened the door and entered the compartment. As he did so, he could not refrain from glancing at the floor, to see if those strange footsteps had been running races there. "What are you looking for?" asked Mr. Murray irritably. "Have you dropped anything?" "No, sir, no. I was only considering where I should be most out of the way." "Oh, there," answered his master, indicating a seat next to the window, and at the same time moving to one on the farther side of the carriage. "Let no one get in. Say I'm ill, mad, that I've scarlet fever, the plague, whatever you please." And with this wide permission, Mr. Murray laid his legs across the opposite cushion, wrapped one rug around his shoulders and another round his body, turned his head aside, and went to sleep, or at least seemed to do so. "If he's going to die, I hope he'd be considered in my wages, but I'm afraid it won't. Perhaps it's the old lady, but that would be too good a fortune," reflected Davis, and then he fell, a thinky, a principle of Gage's many suggestions, and those mysterious footprints, for which he kept at intervals furtively looking, but they did not appear, and at last the valet, worn out with vain conjectures, dropped into a pleasant doze, from which he did not wake till they were nearing Norwich. "We will go to a hotel till I find out what Miss Murray's plans are," said that lady's grandson, when he found himself on the platform, and as if they had been only waiting this piece of information, two small invisible feet instantly skipped out of the compartment they had just vacated, and walked after Mr. Murray, leaving visible marks at every step. "Great heavens, what's the meaning of this?" mentally asked Davis, surprised by fright after 20 perilous and scheming years into an exclamation which almost did duty for a prayer. For a moment he felt sick with terror, then clutching his courage with the energy of desperation, he remembered that though wet footprints might mean death and destruction to the Murrays, his own ancestral annals held no record of any such portent. Neither did the Murrays, so far as he was aware, but then he was aware of very little about that family. If the Irish girl Gage spoke of was informed by drops of blood that her brother lay dead, why should not Mr. Murray be made aware, through the token of pattering footsteps, that he would very soon succeed to some large fortune? Then any little extra attention Mr. Davis showed his master now would be remembered in his wages. It was certainly unpleasant to know these damp feet had come down all the way from London, and were going to the hotel with them, but needs must with a certain driver, and if portents and signs and warnings were made worth his while, Mr. Davis conceived there might be advantages connected with them. Accordingly, then, when addressed to Mr. Murray, his valet's voice assumed a more deferential tone than ever, and his manner became so respectfully tender that onlookers rashly imagined the ideal master and the faithful servant of fiction had at least come in the flesh to Norwich. David's conduct was, indeed, perfect, devoted, without being intrusive. He smoothed away all obstacles which could be smoothed, and even by dint of a judicious 2 minutes alone with the doctor for whom he sent, managed the introduction of a useful sedative and some medicine, which the label stated was to be taken every 4 hours. He saw to Mr. Murray's rooms, and Mr. Murray's light repast, and then he waited on Mr. Murray's grandmother, and managed that lady so adroitly she at length forgave the offender for having caught a chill. "Your master is always doing foolish things," she said. "It would have been much better to remain even for a day or two in London rather than risk being laid up. However, you must nurse him carefully. Try to get him well enough to dine at Lewsdale Court on Monday. Fortunately, tomorrow is Sunday, and he can take complete rest. Now, Davis, remember, I trust to you." "I will do my best, ma'am," Davis said humbly, and went back to tell his master the interview had gone off without any disaster. Then, after partaking of some mild refreshment, he repaired to bed in a dressing-room opening of Mr. Murray's apartment, so that he might be within call and close to hand to administer those dosage which to be taken at intervals of every 4 hours. "I feel better tonight," said Mr. Murray last thing. "Oh, it is this beautiful air, sir," answered Davis, who knew it was the sedative. "I hope you'll be quite well in the morning." But spite of the air, in the grey dawn, Mr. Murray again dreadful dream, a worse dream than which he laid its heavy hand on him in London. He thought he was by the riverside beyond Docket Point, beyond where the little water lilies grow. To his right were the little grove of old and twisted willows, guarding a dell strewed in dry seasons with the leaves of many autumns. But in his dream, wet and sodden by reason of heavy rain, there in June wild roses bloomed. There in winter hips and haws shone ruddy against the snow. To his left flowed a turbid river, turbid with floods that had troubled its peace. On the other bank lay a stagnant length of Surrey, while close at hand the Middlesex portion of Chertsey Mead stretched in a hopeless fiat on the bridge, just visible in the early twilight of a summer's evening that had followed after a dull, lowering day. From out of the gathering gloom there advanced, walking perilously near to Drumsey Deep, a solitary female figure, who, when they met, simply said, "So you've come at last," after which night seemed so close around him, silence for a space to lay its hands upon him. But at the same time Davis was seeing visions also. He bade Lane long wake, trying to evolve order out of the day's chaos, but in vain. The stillness fretted him. The idea that even those mysterious feet might in the darkness be printing their impress about his master's bed irritated his brain. Twice he got up to give that medicine order to be taken every 4 hours, but finding on each occasion Mr. Murray sleeping quietly, he forbore to arouse him. He heard hour after hour chime, and it was not till the first hint of dawn that he fell into some deep slumber, and he dreamt about the subject nearest his heart, a public house. He thought he bad saved or gained enough to buy a roadside inn, on which he had long cast eyes of affectionate regard, not in London, but not too far out, a delightful inn, where holiday-makers always stopped for refreshment, and sometimes for the day. At an inn with a pretty old-fashioned garden filled with some fruit trees and some vegetables, with a grass plot around which were erect little arbours where people could have tea or stronger stimulants, a skittle ground where men could soon make themselves very thirsty, and many other advantageous tediouses to mention. He had purchased his money in his pocket, and having paid a deposit, was proceeding to settle the affair, merely diverging from his way to call on a young widow he meant to make Mrs. Davis, a charming woman who, having stood behind a bar before, seemed the very person to make the wheat chaff a triumphant success. He was talking to her sensibly, when suddenly she amazed him by saying in sharp-heard voice, "Kiss me, kiss me, kiss me," 3 times over. The request seemed so strange that he stood quite astounded, and then awoke to hear the same words repeated. "Kiss me, kiss me, kiss me," someone said distinctly in Mr. Murray's room, the door of which stood slightly open, when all was quiet. Only still half awake, Davis sprang from his bed and walked across the floor, conceiving, so far as his brain was in a state to conceive anything, that his senses must have been playing him some trick. "Oh, you won't?" said the voice again, in a tone which rooted him to the spot where he stood. "And yet, as we are never to meet again, you might kiss me once," the voice added caressingly. "Only once more." "Who the deuce has he got with him now?" thought Davis, but almost before the question was shaped in his mind, there came the choked, gasping cry of, And loose me, tigress devil, followed by a sound of a desperate wrestling for life. In a second, Davis was in the room. Through the white blinds, light enough penetrated to show Mr. Murray in the grip, apparently, of some invisible antagonist who seemed to be trying to strangle him. To and fro, from side to side, the man and the unseen phantom went swaying in that awful struggle. Short and fast came Mr. Murray's breath. While making one supreme effort, he flung his opponent from him and sank back across the bed, exhausted. Wiping the moisture from his forehead, Davis trembled in every limb, and advanced where his master lay, and found that he was still deep and fast asleep. Mr. Murray's eyes were wide open, and he did not stir hand or foot while the man covered him up as well as he was able, and then he looked timidly around, dreading to see the second actor in the scene just ended. "I can't stand much more of this," Davis exclaimed, and the sound of his own voice made him start. There was brandy in the room which had been left overnight, and the man poured himself out and swallowed a glass of the liquor. He ventured to lift the blind and look at the floor, which was wet, as though buckets of water had been thrown over it, while the prints of the little feet were everywhere. Mr. Davis took another glass of brandy. That had not at least been watered. "Well, this is a start," he said in his own simple phraseology. "I wonder what the governor's been up to." For it was now borne in upon the valet's understanding that this warning was no shadow of any event to come, but the telltale ghost of some tragedy which could never be undone.